A lot of bassists want to groove and sound confident when they play, but there's one hidden weakness in their fretting hand that stops them from ever reaching this level of musicianship. After 16 years of professional bass teaching, I've seen this problem come up again and again, which is why I always bring students back to learning one bass line because it fixes these problems better than any exercise ever could. So in this video, I'll show you the subtle fretting hand technique that this line teaches that instantly unlocks relaxed fingers, clean timing, and rock solid groove. Now this technique is something I first learnt about years ago when I was learning Wish I Didn't Miss You by Angie Stone. Now of course that samples Backstabbers by the OJ, and on paper I thought learning this would be easy. But no matter how much I practiced, I couldn't get these root, fifth, and octave patterns to sit well and groove like the record. Now, after months of focusing on all the common advice out there, like focus on the drummer or work on your groove first, I was still failing, and that is when I learned an important lesson. This is something I go much deeper into in my technique workshop that's linked below, but the lesson is that groove and technique are not separate things. The truth is that working on groove first and then technique as an approach is always doomed to failure. The reason being is that the two actually rely on one another. You can't separate them. Thinking this way often encourages us to think that groove is something that we hear up in our ears and that our technique is kind of somehow just sort of separate to that. But the truth is we actually need our hands and our technique to be able to actually manifest and represent what it is we're hearing in our ears up here. We can all hear that this song grooves. That's really the easy part. Our ears can already identify that. But not all of us can play the way that we hear because the link between our ears and our hands isn't yet strong enough. This is why a lot of the best bass players will say that good groove and good time has to be in your fingers and your technique as much as it is in your ears. So if you're struggling to make your lines groove, you're probably suffering from the same problem that I was. You're just working on your ears and not your technique. And as such, your technique can still let you down. Really what you should be trying to do is to bring your technique up to the level of your ears so that they can work together. Great groove only really happens when the two of those things are in alignment. So the idea of working on groove first or just following the drummer is good advice, but often it forces bass players to make a choice that they don't really need to make. It's not about groove or technique. It's about both together. But this does bring up a new question. If you want to make a bass line like this one groove, how do you actually raise your technique to the level to match what you hear? Well, next I'm going to show you the exact technique that helped make these root, fifth, and octave patterns click, and we're going to learn it in two parts. The second part is the technique itself, but before you can learn that, we first have to do the first part, which is undoing a bad habit. Because if you keep playing with this bad habit, it will completely sabotage your playing and your sense of groove, even if you are using good technique. Now, the first thing about this bad habit I discovered was actually shortly after I started learning this song. To try and figure out what was going wrong, I started filming my practice sessions. And as I'd watch them back, I would notice that for the most part, everything was fine, but things always fell apart as soon as I moved into playing these root, fifth, octave patterns that cross through the strings. That's when my groove completely fell apart, but it's also when I started to really see what the problem was. What I was doing was a classic mistake I see self-taught players do all the time. It's one of the things I started to correct in my technique workshop. Whenever they play arpeggios or shapes that jump across the strings, they will compress their fingers down like this to get up to those higher notes. The problem with doing this is that when you compress your fingers, the hand tenses up, it certainly locks up, the hand shape itself becomes much, much weaker. And when your hand is tense and weak, your timing gets much, much worse. Compressing your hand like this simply makes it work much harder than it needs to. So it becomes slower and less accurate at articulating notes. So even if your plucking hand is still on point, and let's face it, most of the time we think about groove as being a plucking hand issue, you will still sound messy if you're trying to play with bad fretting hand mechanics. That's why step one to making this line and these types of lines groove is to stop compressing the fingers on your fretting hand. But now the question is, what should you actually do instead to make sure that your fretting hand can cleanly articulate what you want to play and support your sense of groove? Well, here's the technique that I now use to play this line, and it makes playing across these strings with real groove effortless. So instead of compressing your fingers when you move across the strings, instead, what you want to do is you want to use your forearm to rotate the fingers like this. What this does is it moves all the heavy lifting movements into your forearm to actually move the fingers around. That then moves the fingers closer to the notes they need to play, so they've got to travel less distance, but it also takes the actual movement burden off the fingers, so they are much more relaxed, much freer to play. And that means your playing will become much less tense and grooving will be much, much easier. So here's what to do to use this technique to start playing notes cleanly. When it's time to play up those root fifth octave shapes from Wish I Didn't Miss You, you want to rotate your forearm inwards from the elbow. That lines up your fingers perfectly with the root fifth octave shape that they need to play. Then when you're done and you need to get out of that shape, you just rotate your forearm back. By doing this, you will keep your fingers relaxed and your timing consistent. And that is how you will turn good technique into natural groove. But now there's a new problem. Your musicianship as a bass player will only be as good as your technique allows it to be. And the next big test for your technique is getting it to the level where you can add in fills spontaneously and start to embellish what you do a little bit. I've done a full video breakdown on an easy bass fill system I use to help you drop fills into lines exactly like this. So if you want to lock in and build on all the progress you've made in this video, click up here to watch that bass fills video next.